So what should Christians think about the manosphere? Is it a good thing? A bad thing? A medium thing? Terrible opening. Anyway, let's discuss. So first, let's define it. The manosphere is basically a cultural movement which has been fueled largely by YouTube, social media and podcasts, and which has influenced the thoughts and lives of men. It's not an official movement, and I don't know if everybody that I think's in it would consider themselves to be part of it, but there's a lot of big names involved. You've got Joe Rogan, whose podcast gets around 1 billion downloads a month. You have Andrew Tate, who was the most Googled person in the world last year. You've got Jordan Peterson, who's a best-selling author and whose lectures sell out arenas. You've got other big podcasts like the Whatever podcast, the Fresh and Fit podcast, and those are maybe the larger names in the sphere, and you can work your way down. You've got people like Jay Waller and pickup artists, and all the way down to sort of angry red pill guys on TikTok.
I'm so angry!
And that's a fairly broad camp. A lot of those people are going to disagree with each other, but that's what we're referring to here when we talk about the manosphere, as opposed to, say, taking a group of men and compressing them into the shape of a ball. Because, you know, manosphere. Sounds uncomfortable, anyway. But what ties these groups together is in fact the same thing that has caused this movement to take off. Namely that we live in a world which is hostile towards boys, men and masculinity. So you've got things like the school system, which is hardwired against how boys actually behave. You have a lack of men in homes, meaning that boys are growing up without dads and without the masculine skills that dads pass on to their sons. You see all of these different areas where men are faring poorly. They make up the vast majority of suicides. They make up the vast majority of workplace deaths. They make up the vast majority of the prison population, the vast majority of murder victims. They die younger, they're the majority of the homeless population, they pay almost all the alimony, they almost never get their kids in a divorce. And yet our culture tells men that they are the definition of privilege and they need to stand aside and shut up in order to make way for strong female characters.
Strong female character.
Now that's not to get some sort of victim complex or to say that women don't have different struggles, they very much do, but it is to say that the struggles that men have faced have been broadly overlooked and ignored by society. And all of this has led to men having a sense that they are unnecessary, that they are not wanted. They're basically being told that they offer nothing to the world and that their masculine tendencies are innately toxic, which has left them as a generation depressed and directionless. And what's sad about this from a pastoral perspective is that the church has also failed to deal with men well. When we look at how the church treats men, we see a few different options. The first one is that men are berated and treated very harshly for their sins, particularly when compared to how the church treats women.
How dare you! Who in the hell do you think you are?
Another failing is that we give men bad pastoral advice. We tell them things that don't in fact work.
Just believe, I keep saying it, that godliness is sexy to godly people.
And another way is that we've simply lost interest in men and therefore lost the interest of men because we've feminized our faith. So what we see is there's a big vacuum here. Men are looking for instruction and advice and basically for someone to tell them that they're not a complete waste of plasma and there are good things about being a man. And that's where the good side of the manosphere comes in. The fundamental appeal of the manosphere is that they are getting some affirmation and they're getting some tips on how to do life better. In many ways they're getting better advice from there than the church is offering them. For instance, if you have a godly young man and he wants to get married, but at the same time he's no job and out of shape and no confidence and he dresses poorly and he goes to his pastor, the pastor's more likely than anything to tell him, let's pray about it and, volunteer more around church and the right woman will come along. Now that's not terrible advice, and of course we want them to be godly in order to have a good marriage, but the thing that will actually lead to a good marriage is not necessarily the same thing that will get you a date. And in that environment, these guys come along and they tell them stuff that actually works. You need to stand up straight with your shoulders back. You need to get a job. You need to work hard. You need to work out. You need to be confident. You need to ask a woman on a date. And these guys try that and boom, it works. Not that I have any personal experience of this, but I've read lots of books about dates and I know what happens on them. Just kidding, I'm happily married, but it did work that one time I tried it. And there's a fair bit of that going on in the manosphere. It's telling men, look, here's how to be successful, here's how to get ahead, here's some masculine skills that you weren't told but which you actually do need in order to be fulfilled as a man. There's definitely a degree of validity in that. The other positive side is tied to that, which is that these guys actually recognize that men are a thing. That is, that men and women are not the exact same. And as a result, they tend to basically have rejected some of the sort of critical theory ideas of our day, i.e. they tend to not be woke.
Well, there was some knucklehead that was getting interviewed, they said, if Mike Tyson identified as a woman, should he be able to fight women? And they were like, well, the short answer is yes.
Lord.
And this is another way in which this movement actually appeals specifically to Bible-believing Christians. We reject that idea, and we actually appreciate when people speak up against it with clarity, which these guys, because they're quite masculine men, tend to do. Now, they do so with varying levels of clarity and accuracy. They're not Christian conservatives by any means. I mean, they're basically sort of normal, secular people from like 10 years ago. Things are moving so fast 10 seconds ago.
So fast.
And because they have a big platform and they're willing to talk about these things in a very clear and direct way, which, by the way, many churches have not been willing to do, they've actually been a fairly effective part of the resistance to this movement in our culture. And as a pastor and as a Christian, I look at that stuff and that side of this movement and I say, actually, do you know what? I think that's pretty positive. Let's look at the downsides though. One of the big downsides is the fundamental ethics of this movement. Now, again, there's a big spectrum here. If you take Jordan Peterson, for instance, he draws a lot from the Bible and a lot of his stuff is sort of proverbial wisdom, which is broadly useful. But if we were to take the movement as a whole and paint with very broad brushstrokes, let's imagine what the world would look like if we followed the advice of people in the Manosphere. So let's imagine that everybody does what these guys are telling us to do. They're working out, they're getting a job, they're being confident, and importantly, they're sleeping around more, which is one of the big emphases of guys in this movement. Where does that leave us as a society? Do we have a better world? Have we fixed the West? Have we reversed cultural decline? Have we established the kingdom of God in some way? Not at all.
Not even close.
In many ways, these guys are part of the same problem. The fundamental attacks in the West right now are attacks on faith and attacks on family. And these guys, when it comes to those issues, are broadly speaking on the wrong side.
If you could have a woman at home who loved you and adored you and was loyal to you and wanted to have a family with you, but you could also have one other chick on the side without problems, would you do it? If I could keep my current one and she'd be loyal to me and she understood and we had a family and everything was cool and I had this, then I'd do it. I think every single man who's honest with themselves would do it.
If we think about it from a spiritual perspective, they are no serious threat to the demonic tide that's sweeping through our culture right now. If we take porn, for instance, which is one of the key things that is tearing the West apart, well, Andrew Tate made his money off of cam girls and is telling other people how to make money doing the same thing. That's just one example, but there are many others. And I think Jesus would look at that and say, you guys are fools. Like, you might be rich and wealthy fools as opposed to poor and effeminate fools, but you are nonetheless fools.
Fool of a took.
You're not stopping the destruction of our society, you're just ensuring that you're on the upper echelons of whatever new society we're going into. So that's one problem. Another problem I see is that they're often transgressive for its own sake. That is, they'll say things that are controversial because it's kind of good for the brand, not because it's necessarily good or true or virtuous. And sometimes that comes across as courageous, but it can be misguided courage. You know, you can die in battle because you're the first one charging into the foxhole with the machine guns pointing at you, or you can also die in battle because you decided to dress up as a clown and go out there on a unicycle.
You're all stupid. See, they're gonna be looking for army guys.
And some of the stuff they say is awful, like genuinely awful.
But I said that if a woman is going out with a man, she belongs to that man. That's his woman. So she wants to do OnlyFans. She owes him some money because she's his.
Hot take here. I don't think that's how Jesus speaks about women. So let's be clear. Being anti-woke is not enough. Anti-wokeness is insufficient. You need to actually be right. If we view wokeness as a religion, which I do, well, let's put it in the category of any other religion. Being not a Muslim is not sufficient just because Islam is wrong. You actually need to have the right religion, you need to be a Christian. And so that's definitely one of the other downsides of this movement. And if I wanted to summarise my major concern with this movement, I would use a phrase from C.S. Lewis, men without chests. C.S. Lewis unpacks this idea that the Greeks had, that basically man was divided up into three parts: the head, the stomach, and the chest. So in the head you have the rational, you have the intellectual, you have the skills and the abilities. In the stomach you have the appetites, the desires, and then in the chest you have the virtues, you have the character. Now, he was talking into a different context, but what he said was that the head must rule the stomach through the chest. The intellect, the ideas, the skills need to have mastery over the appetites And in order to have that, you need to have the virtues in the right place. And he talked about people in his day as being men without character. They had skills, they had appetites, but they didn't have virtue. And that's my concern with the manosphere. We live in a world which has told men to get rid of the head and the stomach and the chest, just abandon everything. And these guys are coming along and they're saying, no, 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 you gotta have some skills, you gotta have some thoughts, you gotta have some abilities. And in fact, all of your masculine urges are not inherently wrong or evil, but they've left out the need for virtue as an essential part of what it is to be a man. And so that's my final word on this. To be a man is not merely to have the skills and the appetites of the man. It is to have the character of a man. And the ultimate example of a man like that is the God-man. It is Jesus, who was the truest man who has ever lived. And so as a pastor, as a Christian, I can look at the manosphere, I can say there's things within that I appreciate, but it's lacking something core. I don't want to live in the manosphere, I want to live in the kingdom of Christ. And it is when men embrace that, it is when they become men with chests, it's when they become men of virtue, as well as having the head and the stomach. That is when we will save our society and our world. What a great video, eh? Anyway, if you enjoyed that, thank you so much. You can help me if you're on YouTube. You can like, subscribe, and comment. If you're on Twitter, you can retweet. You can also support the channel through Patreon or through PayPal, or you can pick up something from wearecontramundum.com. And if you're on YouTube and you like that video, you will definitely enjoy this next one.